everyone, and welcome to another Building Bridges and conversation with me, Mamobo. And this week we have a special conversation with a really interesting and super inspiring person here today with us. We are about to be entering Traveller Awareness Week, and for those who don't know, and you're listening in, the Traveller community in Ireland are an Indigenous ethnic community in Ireland with a wealth of history, culture, and such knowledge when it comes to their community. And today we're joined by an art activist and journalist, Emma Ward, who's going to be discussing with us about her unique perspective, but also raising awareness as to the unique perspectives of not only the traveller community, but also the disabled community here in Ireland. So Emma is a traveller woman journalist, disability rights activist, and the first in her family to attend third level education. Emma is a full-time wheelchair user and brings a unique and powerful voice in national conversations around inclusivity, around access, equity for the traveller community and disabled community in Ireland. Emma is a speaker, content creator, and co-host of the podcast Minkiers Paving the Way in 2024. As a journalist, Emma has contributed to major publications, and she's contributed to Galway Advertiser, the Irish Times, Galway Daily, and the Student Independent News at the University of Galway. And Emma is currently studying global media and online journalism at Galway Technical Institute. Her work centres challenging inaccessibility in towns, cities, and services across Ireland through video reviews and social commentary. In 2023, Emma was selected as a fellow for the John Schofield Trust. And through her storytelling, activism, and media contributions, Emma continues to advocate for a more just and equitable world for not just the traveller community, for everyone who needs fair and accessibility for their communities in Ireland. So, Emma, lovely to have you today with us.
Hi, Mamobo. Thank you so much for having me on. I am very excited for this conversation. Thank you so much.
Really exciting. So I know I gave you your bio is like huge, and you're a really well thought of person, really well spoken person. But just to give those who are watching or listening in like a brief introduction as to how you came about into this world of not just activism but also journalism and speaking up for injustices that are happening in not just Irish society but I believe globally as well. How did you come into this world?
This is the God honest truth. It was by accident, by luck, really. Um, I'll start with the activism because that's like one of my passionate things. I was born with a condition called Hurler syndrome and scoliosis, and everyone knows that scoliosis is that's the curvature in your spine and all that. So I grew up having a disability, and I didn't feel like I was represented enough in the world. And the way I was taught as a young person, like my parents, they always told me to speak my mind, like say what you want, like you are confident enough to do that. So I always wanted to speak up and say like disability services need to be better, but it wasn't until my nearly 5-year-old nephew was born and he was diagnosed with the same condition as me, Hurler syndrome, that mm, I got this motivation in me. I looked at him and I was like, I had a tough time growing up in a place that's not made for disabled people, and I don't want him to go through what I did. So I was like in my head, I'm gonna try and make some change so he has an easier life. Growing up with a disability is very hard, and then being part of two communities, being a traveler and being part of the disabled community is even harder. So that's kind of how I started volunteering with Enable Ireland in Galway, which is a support system for disabled people. And that's where I kind of started out. And I really enjoyed that. With the journalism, as you mentioned, I'm the only person in my family to go on to third level education. And when I was in Leaving Cert in 2020, I had no idea what I wanted to do. But I knew I love chatting, I love writing, and I love listening to people. I love listening to what their story was. And it wasn't until I had this project of trying to figure out what course you wanted to do in third level. And I had no idea what I wanted to do because I didn't have anyone that I knew that went on to third level education. So my special needs assistant, SNA, put my likes and put like personality traits into Google, and journalism came up. And when I read it, I was like, that's what I'm supposed to do. I don't know what it was. It was just like a switch flipped in my head, and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to become a journalist. And it was again with Enable Ireland. They had asked the first ever story I wrote, and as much as it was a good story to start, it wasn't a very good story for me to write, if that makes sense. I look back at it now and I'm like, you couldn't write at that point, but it gave me the experience of writing for someone else other than myself. And I wrote a review about assisted technology. And that, when I got that published online, I just felt like, oh, this is nice. I need to do more. So I was the PRO for the first ever third level student society for Irish Travellers, Minkers, Whidden. And I wrote a few stories for them. And that kind of got me out there, like publishing in two or three papers in my local town. But it wasn't until 2022 that I wrote a story about my grandmother who recently passed away. She was 91, and I wrote about what her life was like in the 1950s and 60s as an Irish traveller woman. And when I say it was published in the Galway Advertiser and Galway Daily, when I say it blew up, people loved it. I did not I did not expect that. When I wrote that story about my grandmother, first and foremost, I wrote that for my family because at the time she was 91 and I wanted to write down her memories. I wanted it for my family. But as I was writing it, I was like, you know what? I think this would be a good story for other people to read, to learn about my community. And I sent it to the Galway Advertiser and the Galway Daily. Never expected them to actually publish it, and they did. And the reaction I got was so positive that I couldn't believe it because I don't know if you see it, Mamobo, but when you see Irish travellers in the media, it's not always a positive thing. Nine times out of ten, it's a negative. So when that story was published, I, in my head, I was like, I know there could be a chance that I could get a bad reaction because of my experience with seeing travellers being portrayed online. But no, everyone loved the story of my nana. And to this day, it's nearly 3 years since I published that story. It is still my favorite story that I ever written, and it'll always be. And after that, I kind of got a bit known, and I got to write more things. And the journalism, I've worked hard, and I'm very grateful for what I've done so far. So that's my kind of entry into the journalism and activism worlds.
That's so incredibly inspiring, just hearing all of that and just even the inflection of, and I forget what the actual term is. Some people call it their aha moment or that moment of inflection. And what I was hearing from you is in terms of your relative and how, especially when it comes to children and seeing that, okay, sometimes we tend to not think about ourselves when we think about the lives of children or the people that are in our families, we're like, oh no, this needs to actually change. And that moment where you realize that, oh my God, it's gonna be even more harder for him as he grows
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
Great
I
aha moment, you know?
he was born in 2020, and I when he was born in 2020 in June, and he got diagnosed in the July. And when I heard that he had the same condition as me, I felt so sad for him in a way because I know how he's going to struggle with
Mm,
his life. Now, my nephew, his name is Patrick. He's autistic. He's nonverbal autistic as well. So that's an even harder journey
mm,
for him to go on. So I knew in my heart and soul, I was like, if I'm going to make some changes, I'm going to have to make them for him
mm.
because I don't want him to struggle in what the world isn't made for disabled people. So it really isn't. And I'm sorry to say that. And if I can help make a change, I don't care if it's a big or a little one, if I can make it a little bit easier for him and the like the rest of the future generation of people with disabilities, if I can make it easier for them, then I've done my job. I've gotten my goal because they don't deserve to struggle in life like the generations before them. So yeah, Patrick is and always will be my biggest inspiration to do good.
And it's such a motivator. And I think one thing that you really said there that is like the world isn't made for disabled people in mind. And sometimes, and it goes back to even the biases that we have, but like a lot of times, because the majority, of course, are there's a lot of ableism that goes on in the institutions that we create and the things that we create. And like you said, the world isn't created for disabled people.
Yeah.
And in terms of even that intersection of being both disabled and in the traveler community as well, can you speak on what that unique perspectives brings and how that adds to your activism?
Yeah, so as a disabled person, when you're born and you're diagnosed with a disability, the odds are stacked against you. You're told you can't do a lot of things. My parents were told I wouldn't do a lot of things. So that's like from a baby age, there's so many odds stacked against you. You're so like there's such a low expectation of you. So coming from the Irish traveller community, when there's already a lower expectation of Irish travellers, like that's a perspective. Being from both the Irish traveller community and the disabled community, both those communities are so marginalized. There's odds stacked against the people within those. And when I was born and diagnosed, the expectations of me was basically very, very low, nothing. No one expected me to do anything. And being from the Irish traveller community, it's the same thing. There's lower expectation of Irish travellers, and you don't expect Irish travellers to go on and do anything. So I had both of those odds stacked against me from each side of my personality, like my identity. I had both sides of those, and I have my mother and father and my brothers and sisters to thank for making me who I am. All of my brothers, I've two sisters and three brothers and my parents, and they all never let my disability define me or my traveler identity define me. They always told me like, if you want to do something, go do it. You might need a little more like help to get to your goal, but you are well able. And I grew up knowing that I had that in my head. I was like, I can do whatever I want. Yeah, I have a disability. Yeah, I'm a traveler, but they don't define me. They honestly don't define the person I am. The only person that can define me is myself, and I want better for myself. So I grew up with that mindset, but it is hard having that dual identity because I'm listening to the media. Again, it always comes back to the media because when you watch television or you read something, when it's negative, it'll stick in your head. And there's so many negative things about the Irish travel community, and you never really see the positive with the disabled community. If you see something about the disabled community, it's always talk about the problems we are facing, the issues. And if you see something about the Irish travel community, it's always saying that travelers are no good, that we're all doing the same thing, we're all painted with the same brush. And that's not fair because we're not all the same. We are a collective, we're all different people and we're very diverse. So I had those thoughts in my head when I was growing up, like, oh, I might not be able to do a lot because I see it. I wasn't motivated because I'd see it online, like travelers not being able to do anything, and I wouldn't really see anything about disabled people. I didn't feel represented as a disabled person. But going back to my parents, they always said, don't mind what the media says. If you want to go out and do something, do it. You have the support of your family, and like you just need a little bit of support, but have faith in yourself. And that's the way I grew up. I grew up with such a great network with my family that it they helped me get out of my head and pushed me when I needed to be pushed to do what I've been doing. So
It's
yeah,
so important to have that family network and that unit to really, what I was hearing from you were saying, like, of course, especially the media has a huge, and you and I can probably talk for days on it because a part of my PhD was around media representation.
yeah,
The media has a huge, and we don't really even realize it because now it's literally in the palm of our hands. It has a huge way of how we not only see ourselves, but how we see other people. And if you're constantly fed that the groups that you belong to and you had no choice in the matter of the fact that that group is less than, that group is not deserving, that group does not has X amount of negative stereotypes
yeah,
against it, you can start to internalize all those bad things.
yeah,
But what I was hearing from you is that yes, those things exist and we need to challenge those things, whether they may be stereotypes, whether they be media, or maybe even outside things that may be done on the day to day. But having that network and that family and that
yeah,
close relationships that not only um put down those ideas, but reinforce you and tell that you can and you are able is
yeah,
so important. And
yeah.
it's so important. And you were saying
Yeah, I
that for
I'm
you.
so lucky to have the family I have because they never once let me define myself with my disability or define myself as an Irish traveler. And I'm proud to be both, but they
Mm,
never let me just sit there and take the negativity and like let me internalize it. They never let me do that. They always pushed me to do better because they knew I would be able to do good. So
mm.
yeah, I'm very, very lucky to have my family.
Well, it's super essential to have that network and that support system because, particularly for the work that you do in terms of journalism and putting your voice out there, and even the fear that you had when publishing your grandmother's story in terms of like, oh, people are going to say X, Y, and Z about
Yeah,
traveler community, is something that's quite common for those who activists specifically that put themselves out there. And I want to
yeah.
ask you, like, how do you keep going in this work? Because it's a tough one, you know? How do you build that resilience?
I've always been resilient. I have memories of being in the hospital and my nurses telling me, "Oh, you're very tough. You're very tough for what you go through." And being an activist, now sometimes it can be hard and you get burnt out. I've been burnt out a little, like sometimes, but
Activists, take care of yourselves, guys. Anyone who's activist listening, take care of yourself, please.
yeah, yes. But it comes back to me watching my nephew, Patrick. I look at him and I say, yeah, I look after myself for a while. But when it comes to it, I need to get back into the role of things because I want to make the world better for him. He is my guiding star, if you want to say it. I look at him and he motivates me to do what I've been doing and to keep going. Um, the resilience again, it's just I've had a lot of operations in my life. I had surgeries for scoliosis, and to recover from them, you need to have a lot of resilience. You can't let them. You can't sit down and let it get to you. You can't go under, if that makes sense. You have to keep going. So I've been building my resilience for many, many years. So I think that's the only way, like, to me, that's the reason why I have such great resilience and stubbornness. I'm very, very stubborn.
And where do you think that stubbornness comes from?
Uh, um, it's the expectation and
Mm.
people telling me that I can't do a certain thing, and I'm like, no, 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 I can't do it. I will prove you wrong. I love to prove people wrong, but my stubbornness, in all honesty, probably comes from my dad. My dad is the very same, and I love that I got one of his that trait from him. He's very similar in that way. So yeah, I am very stubborn, and I hate when people say to me, "You can't do something," because I will go out and try my damn hardest to prove you wrong. So,
It's a great thing. One of my favorite things is I'm very similar to you in that sense. One of my favorite things is being underestimated, and
yeah,
then it's a kick to be like, well, I could do it.
yeah,
Now you said
yeah,
I can.
def- definitely. And it's also another. I'm the youngest in my
Mm,
family. So that stubborn streak trying to prove to my brothers and sisters that I'm as tough when I was younger, that I was as tough as them. So it was just that kind of, it was always from like a very young age I had that stubborn streak in me. And I fine tuned it into my work now, which I'm so grateful that I have that streak in me. I don't think I'd be able to do what I've been doing without that.
it's necessary, and especially in that world of activism, to keep the fight going. Of course, there'll
Yeah,
be times where you're down or times where you're like, oh, why am I doing this? I don't want to do this anymore. But once you see one, you look at your North Star, which is your nephew, looking at the outcomes of the work that you want to do, and then having that resilience, motivation, and like you said, stubbornness.
Yeah,
Well,
I felt burnt out a couple weeks ago. So I lost my grandmother in January, so I was really burnt out. But just a couple of days ago, someone tagged me in something for, so my condition, the medical term for it is MPS, and I have MPS one. And yesterday was MPS Awareness Day, funny enough. And someone who has MPS tagged me in something, and she was like, "I've met so many great people," and she included me in it. And I was like, "Oh my God, you like." She's like, Emma is a fantastic journalist, and she just said that. And when I read the post, I was like, she included me. Oh my God. And I was like, that's why I do what I do, because as much as like the activism side, I want to change the perception of disabled people, because the perception of disabled people is again underestimated. Can't really do like the low expectation, and I want to change that. So having this younger wheelchair user say that about me, I just felt I'm making an impact somewhere, and that really kind of refuels me. So
amazing.
yeah,
That's so amazing to hear. And I think like when you start seeing the outcomes of your work, it sometimes can motivate you to keep going it much more further.
yeah,
You were saying that like especially you got motivation from your family and your family push you forward. And you mentioned that you were the first person in your family to actually enter third level education. And I have a stat here that it's like only 13% of traveler girls complete secondary education, let alone enter into third level education. So
yeah. I
it to be like, how did that feel? First and foremost, how did that feel for you to be like the only person in that room entering that space? And then like what's going on in terms of why, let's say, not just traveler women, but traveler community, because some people may be not aware of it, but traveler community are not, let's say, finishing secondary school or going into third level education.
oh, okay. So to start off, now this comes back to my stubborn streak.
Hmm.
When I was in school, I knew that my brothers and sisters had only gotten to junior cert level. And being stubborn and competitive, I had always said, I'm going to do my leaving cert and go on to third level education so I can be the best of all of us. And that was just my stubborn streak. But it was just really, I love learning, and I want to do better for myself. I want to get on in education. But as a disabled person in secondary school, and I've seen it a few times, they had I I'm going to have to try and word this very carefully. When I was in school, and even now, 5 years on, I am constantly told, and I've learned that this is racism in itself. I don't look like your typical Irish traveller, and I don't speak like your typical Irish traveller, which I know it's racism in itself, because what does a typical Irish traveller look like? We are all born into the community, it's in our blood. It's not defined by the way we dress or how we talk. So I seen the way teachers treated other Irish travellers in my year, and it was just the low expectation. And I remember one day I went back in after junior cert, and they said to me, and looking back now, I understand it's racism, but at that point, I it didn't click in my head. Now, this is 6 years ago. They're like, "Oh, you're back." And I was like, "Yeah, I want to finish leaving. I want to go on to my leaving cert and finish school." And I was like, "Oh, didn't expect you to come back." To me, as a disabled person, there's a different expectation for me, anyways, in the traveler community. But I looked at them, and in my head, I was gobsmacked. I was like, "What do you mean by this?" I was like, "Education is. I love education. I always loved education." And that was the only time it was only said to me once, and once only. And even to this day, I'm still gobsmacked, because they had said that to me, and I was like, I didn't know how to respond. But with education, Irish travelers, there's a very low expectation of all Irish travelers. And yeah, there might be some travelers that don't want to go on in education, but because of that, every Irish traveler is painted the same way. They're seen the same way that all of us don't want to progress in education. And when you come to a certain age, teachers just stop trying, which is horrible because they should try to keep helping Irish travelers. Like it, I can't really speak on the behalf of the community, but I think it's the lack of support, culturally appropriate support for Irish travelers, and the willingness from teachers to want to help those Irish travelers that want to progress in education. If 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 that was done, Irish travelers might feel more welcome in education because let's face it, when you're in secondary schools, kids growing up, turning into teenagers, and when you're from a marginalized community, you get comments and you get looks, you get the snicker, the rude looks. You don't want to be there because you're made to feel
Other,
unwelcome.
yeah. Yeah, and it's really hard to think of that. And somebody who's still in, let's say, their formative years as a child, especially when you're even in as that early teenager and you're so self-conscious and thinking those little words that those people of influence, whether that may be your parents, that may be relatives, or even their teachers, those things that they say to you really stick. So if a teacher tells you, "Oh, why are you still here?" or "Oh, I thought you wouldn't," it really sticks in your head when you're in that really formative years.
Yeah.
And it's again, I commend your stubborn nature in terms of being like, what are you saying? I'm going to continue, you know?
Yeah, I was just very stubborn in that sense, and it brings me back to my siblings. They all said that to me. They're like, we didn't progress because they had teachers that didn't expect them or didn't want to help them progress. They were put at the back of the class, and like if you're put at the back of the class and you're not being taught properly, you're not going to want to stay. You're made to feel unwelcome in that room, and you have no other choice but to leave because you wouldn't want to stay somewhere that you're made to feel so unwelcome and uncomfortable.
It's
So
it
I've always, it's just an awful thing, and it was when I grew up and their word really stuck to me. I was like, no, what you went through was really hard, like really bad. And I am grateful in one way that I never got that experience because, again, being disabled meant teachers had a different odd stance against me. They didn't look at me as an Irish traveller, which is awful for me to say,
yeah.
which is awful for me to say. I know that. But I'm grateful that even though my brothers and sisters had that negative experience, they always told me like, "Oh, go on and do whatever you want. You might have a easier experience than we did."
And it's really sad that that just because of the perception of you not being in the traveler community that you were treated in
Different.
a different or even better way is really just like ridiculous. And I have
Yeah,
a parallel experience for me in terms of like the way I talk. So I don't have a very thick Nigerian accent, and I grew up in Ireland, and I have like that under cultural understanding, and I find it easier sometimes than those who are, let's say, new migrants into the country. So it's just that level of like, okay, we need to start educating the wider people on their own
yeah,
biases sometimes, because that's, of course, we had the privilege of, let's say, entering into certain spaces because we could assimilate, or I don't know what the word you want to call it,
yeah,
but it's really sad when you think about it for those who don't have can't, let's say, change their accent or the way they their mannerisms or things like
yeah,
those who
yeah.
seem typically,
I
you know.
I feel so now again, I'm coming back to being a wheelchair user, but I feel so grateful that I was able to do what I was doing, but I feel so sad for the other Irish travelers, like my own age, that couldn't go on and progress because of that the stigma and the perception around Irish travelers not wanting to progress. I feel such guilt and shame in a sense, if that makes sense, because I am proud to be an Irish traveller. I am very proud, but I didn't have that typical experience because, again, I don't look like your typical traveller and I'm disabled, and there's a different expectation for me because I am a disabled person in the community.
Makes so much sense. And it's like I'm not gonna say your human experience encompasses a lot, everything about who you are, but these two communities are hugely paramount to who you are in terms of your
Yeah,
identity. And do you
yeah.
feel like you have to kind of like you have to how have you managed to blend both of them together? Or do you feel like
Oh,
you have to kind of like, oh, fight for this one, fight for the other,
it's
fight for this one?
it's
Or it's like,
it's
you know?
very hard if I'm being honest, because again, being from the Irish travel community and being disabled, I had there's a lower expectation of disabled people. And
Mm,
then coming into like being a member of the disabled community, if someone hears that I'm an Irish traveller, you have that 10 seconds of where they're looking at me and I'm like, oh, what's their opinion of me now? And I feel as a disabled person, I can speak more about what my lived experience as a disabled person is about, like making changes, than I can of being a traveler activist, because I didn't have that typical upbringing as an Irish traveler. I never really faced racism myself, but I've seen it happen to my family and to my like people, my cousins and all that. I've seen it happen, but I cannot and I never will speak about things that aren't my own story. I can
exactly.
talk about like the education side. I can talk about how travelers sometimes feel on that side, but I can never really tackle those issues because I didn't grow up with it. I don't know exactly what it's like.
Mm.
And when I say that, Mamobo, I feel like I'm letting my traveler identity down in that side, because I do want to help make the world a better place for the Irish travelers. So
And it's necessary. And I would say to you that you have that unique experience. You have that understanding, but your identity as a traveler is yours and yours
yeah,
alone. Um and I find this especially when talking to people that let's say may come from even like a mixed culture or mixed race background that feel like they're in between these two worlds, or they're not doing one identity enough justice or understanding or knowledge. But I always say to them like you are you, and
yeah,
what that community is, you're part of that community, and your understanding of that community evolves
yeah,
over time. You were born into it, but it doesn't discount the fact that your own unique experience as of now is something that should be valued and cherished, you know?
mhm,
So
yeah,
it's it's really great to hear that you're doing that work to really further your under further your engagement and understanding of your own community. But it doesn't discount the experiences that you had today, date, and even those negative experiences. That one with the teacher is still really hitting me in terms of here. I was like, how can a teacher say that, you know? Um,
yeah,
it's necessary that like your unique experience has a lot of value, specifically coming from the traveler community as well. And I know
mhm,
that Traveler Awareness Week is we're having this conversation as Traveler Awareness Week is going on, and we're going to be sharing more information on our page on GERM about it. But I'd love to hear from you, Emma, like who are some traveler activists or voices that you feel people should need to know about more, and so they can educate themselves more about not only the traveler community but the intersections of the community as well, those who may have disabilities, those who may come from the LGBTQ plus community, those who may have very nuanced experiences of what it means to be a traveler in modern Ireland.
there is so many incredible Irish travelers that I could talk about for hours, but if I had to narrow it down and give two, Martin Bean's Ward. He is a fantastic comedian, presenter, journalist, theatre maker. He is part of the LGBTQ plus community, and he's a brilliant, brilliant man. And personally, I have a lot to thank to him because he's given me a lot of opportunities in my own journalistic and activism careers. He is such a fantastic man who is doing so much for himself, but he's also helping to change the narrative of the Irish travellers in the media. And he is not forgetting where he's coming from. He is always looking to support Irish travellers in the arts, and he's just a fantastic man. I could talk about him for hours. He is one of the greatest Irish travellers ever, in my opinion, and I think people should get to know him because he does so much for the Irish traveller community in the arts.
That's incredible. And I've heard of Martin myself. So if you want to, guys, go follow Martin. Martin's an amazing person, and his work is just really, and even having experienced some of his work is just like the human experience, but just seen through the traveler lens. And sometimes I feel with storytelling specifically, and the work that you do, Emma, in terms of, and I think I feel, I don't know, the traction from your grandmother's story, it was a human story seen through
Yeah,
a traveler lens. So
yeah,
everybody loves their nanny, you know, everybody loves their family member.
yeah.
Most people, they have fabulous experiences about their grandparents. So hearing that and seeing that from a different community experience, yes, you can learn about that community, but
Mhm.
ultimately the story is that human story about somebody reminiscing about that.
I was very close to my grandmother because my paternal grandmother passed away when I was four, and my grandfather's passed away before I was born. So I grew up being very, very close to my nana. And when I was trying to separate myself from the PRO role because I had left that role, I thought while I was writing her story, I was like, this story could separate me. Like, it's the best person ever. She was my favorite person in the world. And I was like, people deserve to know her story because she was an incredible, incredible woman. And to this day, it's nearly 3 years since the story was published. It will always be my proudest story ever. And people still talk to me about it. And when she passed away, the Galway Advertiser republished it, and
Mm,
it got an even better reaction,
brilliant.
which is to me still so mind blowing that despite all the negative things you can see about Irish travellers in the media and how people react to those things, that people were reacting so politely and enthusiastically saying she was an incredible woman, and it still too it made me feel so much better in my grief, in my very early grief. It made me feel so proud of it, and I'll always be proud of it. But the other person I'd like to mention, and you have heard of her, Letitia McCrudden.
Mm,
She is a powerhouse
mhm,
of a nearly 21 year old, nearly 21. She is a firecracker. And we we did our podcast together, but we are genuinely, genuinely good friends. And she is one of those people that I know she'll be one of my lifelong friends. And we've done so much together for the better of the community. We do our own bit of activism, but then we come together and we share our unique experiences as two Irish traveller women, and she does a lot of work for domestic abuse survivors and changing the narrative of that within the Irish travel community. So I think people really should get to know her because again, powerhouse of a woman.
and so young at that. She's has so much of life ahead of her, and she's already making so many shapes in the Irish scene, and making sure that traveler voices are heard and known not only Ireland but globally as well. So it's
Yeah.
incredible to hear those two voices. And finally, before we close, Emma, I want to hear from you, and this is something that I ask not just everybody that hops on these conversations, but people I ask in general. To you, and because our mission in GERM is to unify across differences, what does it mean to be a unifier to you?
I want to make changes for the disabled people and the traveler community so they can go out and not have to fight tooth and nail for an opportunity or chance to better themselves. I want to show the next generation that if I could do something, they certainly can because the odds were stacked against me, and I didn't let that seep into my head, and I am making changes for the better because I want the next generation to not bat an eyelid when they want to go out and do something. I want the world to be an easier place for them to get whatever they want out of life. So that's what it means for me as a unifier. I want to make that so much easier for the next generation.
And it's incredible. And that's like you said, in terms of your nephew and the family in your life, really making that space, not just for them, but wider, to make sure that the world is more inclusive and open and equitable for everyone
Yeah,
going up. And
yeah,
um, sometimes we hear about this diversity, the importance of diversity. Diversity already exists. But like you
yeah.
said, not everybody has the same starting block as others. And
No,
what we're doing is to really bring those together to make
yeah,
the world more equitable and just place for everybody,
yeah.
considering
No,
us regardless, you know?
in my opinion, and this is my opinion alone, everyone should have the same chance. And
Mm,
right now we don't. We all know there's not enough people aren't equal in the world. I'm not just saying in Ireland, in the world. And that is a shame because if everyone was given the same chance, can you just imagine the type of world we could have? It'd be a
mm.
better one, in my opinion, if we were all given the same chance to do whatever it is to make our lives better and make the changes that are so desperately needed.
So necessary. So necessary. And understanding that by giving someone the same, an equal opportunity or a chance, it's not taking away from anybody else.
No,
It's making
no,
sure everyone starts at the same threshold, you know? But thank you
yeah.
so much, Mija, for joining the conversation. It was really great to
Thank you so much for the conversation. I really enjoyed it.
and hear from your experience. You're such an inspiring person. And if anyone's listening in and want to kind of touch more about your work, where can they go?
You can find me basically on any social media app. I'm on literally everything. But my two kind of main platforms is Instagram, which is Emma Ward Journalist, and Twitter, which is Emma Ward Journal.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining, Emma. And we will see you in the next one.
Thank you very much.